Welcome to a very special installment of Nailed, a very special emergency episode. Merry Trentmas, everyone.
And a happy new...
Year Zero.
Nice.
A happy New Year Zero and a Merry Trentmas. And we're late. This isn't a normal episode because we missed that because my computer exploded.
Yeah, it was a sad day.
But we're using a backup system held together. How rough does it look right now?
It looks pretty rough.
The office is very, very rough. But that's a problem for another time.
Yeah.
We already had this interview with Adam Steiner recorded, so we said we got to get that out to the people.
That's Oscar. He
And
said
Oscar-
Mary Ninmus.
Oscar's here, and he's even more freaked out than ever.
A lot of chords for him to play with now.
So we just want to put out this interview with Adam Steiner, the writer of Into the Never, the Making of the Downward Spiral book. And if this part of the recording sounds weird, blame the laptop setup we've got going right now. But the interview part sounds good, I think, right? You listened?
Yeah, it sounded good. I listened to it.
How do you think it went?
I think it went very well.
Yeah, I think it was really good. We should just let them listen to it, though. Is there anything else that we should say before?
Nah, we'll pop back in and say goodbye. And
Okay. Yeah, Adam was really awesome. I hope you like the interview. We will be back after the interview. So here we are with Adam Steiner, author of Into the Never, which many of you probably know and love. But if you don't yet, it's a great book I just finished about the making of the downward spiral that we both love. And it's one of the most in-depth and dense and well-researched things I've probably ever read about Nine Inch Nails. To be fair, I haven't read... I don't know that I've read other books about Nine Inch Nails, to be honest.
you read the 33 and a third.
Oh, okay. I read the Daphne Carr.
Yeah.
It's more of a pamphlet. But anyway, thank you so much, Adam, for being on. And how are you doing?
Yeah, I'm good. Thank you. Thank you for having me on as well. And in the holiday season as well. So it's quite exciting.
Right. And we're wrapping up our downward spiral era as Christmas is coming. So going out of those really dark moods into, I don't know, a jollier type of time.
A festive dark mood. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's
We're
kind of
putting
best of both.
the darkness is still there, but we're putting some Christmas lights on it, I guess.
Having some tinsel.
Jingle jangle.
Yeah, well, we're jingling that tambourine or the sleigh bell as Trent himself would love to do. Kind of right out the gate, this is a question just from me. So I compiled questions from listeners. I asked them what they wanted to know and also what Jess and I wanted to know are included in here. Mm-hmm. But first, I just wanted to talk about our shared experience, both of us having read your book. So we have a sort of a shared experience. And what's it like living in the downward spiral for so long, as I'm sure you had to writing this book? And so this is a multi-part type thing. Was there a negative impact on your psyche? Is there TDS fatigue? And now, can you go back and listen again to the album in any sort of a normal way?
I think multi-part questions are always the fun ones.
Yeah.
Because they're the ones that make you think. And then you think you have a position. And then you say, by the way, here's something coming from the side. And they gotcha.
No, it's just badly worded and it's a run-on sentence. I'm sorry.
No, they're also exciting because I have to think on my feet, which is perhaps the best way to answer a question rather than me come at it too pre-approved. Okay. So, yes, the first part of your question, getting into the downward spiral, I don't feel off the cuff that I was personally sucked too completely into that zone. I tried to remain quite objective, almost like a journalist. Some people were concerned that I used a lot of quotation, but I tried to use more of Trent's voice in the book from things that he'd actually said, especially about the downward spiral and things that he said throughout other parts of his career, obviously post 1994, which brings us all the way up to now, about his music in general and his attitudes to life and so on, and how that related back to where he was at in 1993/94, and so on. But yeah, to answer your question more personally, I guess, I feel that I was okay going into the album because it's such a, what I call an impossible record, a bit like things, I compare it to things like Joy Division, the first album, Unknown Pleasures, and things like Manic Street Preachers' Holy Bible, which some people, I think, especially in America, aren't so familiar with.
Right.
And so they're a bit confused by the comparison. But it was an album that obviously came out in the same year. And I think actually in April of 94 in the UK. Albums that deal with quite extreme nihilism and high art influences and extreme states of emotional and mental anguish and darkness. So I think when you immerse yourself in that stuff, on the one hand, you're like, it's okay, I'm sifting through material and finding things that are relevant to my argument, or where I find a strong thematic strand through Trent's own experiences and his own perceptions of his music. You don't necessarily get too affected yourself, but it is a really dark album. And I think Kerrang did a list, gosh, back when I was a teenager. I don't know what year that might have been, but where they did a list a long time ago. And, it was the 50 heaviest albums. And they meant heaviest, not just in music, but things like Slayer, Rain in Blood, and so on.
Yeah.
And they're just talking themes, emotions, the physical weight of the music and so on. So how all those things come together in terms of just, force of sound and how it makes you feel emotionally, and lyrical content, which is obviously, on the Downward Spiral, particularly dark, how that can sort of sit on top of you and sometimes sort of overtake you. I think the one thing I come back to with the Downward Spiral is that for me, and I think a lot of people in my generation and around it, either side, is that it was a really cathartic experience, and it's the kind of album that talks back to you, and where you are struggling to find expression for certain feelings and certain emotions. It's the kind of record that shows you, A, that you're not alone, but B, also that there's ways of approaching negative, challenging feelings that can be helpful just in terms of getting it out of your system, expressing it, and having that, almost that hand or that voice that walks alongside you. So as tough as the Spiral thing is, you don't listen to it all the time. It's something that you come back to because it has a lot of resonance for you personally. And I think that's one of the amazing, enduring things about the Downward Spiral, that people will go back to it, even though it's very dark and challenging, and it doesn't necessarily make them feel bad. It's perhaps uplifting, but it's hard to say why that is for people in general. I think it's very individual,
Yeah, that's a great positive way to look at it after living in it for so long. And we've lived in it. Well, we've talked on podcasts, 10 hours about it now at this point. So maybe a little less than you. But there's a lot
over several months, I reckon, though.
Okay. Yeah. But I'm finding more reasons that I really like it. But also there is a fatigue involved, and I am ready to move on. I feel ready to move on to the Fragile and then become fatigued by the Fragile
in a whole new and exciting way.
Yeah.
And I think you've hit on something there, though, because it's really hard for Trent Reznor to talk about the Downward Spiral because it was such a long time ago, and he's quite a different person now, and yet he's still that person who made that record. And you can't necessarily line the two things up, especially in musical careers, because ideally artists develop, change, evolve, if we want to be really heavy-handed. And I think we need to allow them that they have a particular phase in their life in which they could only have done that certain kind of work, and they can't repeat it. So where you've got things like The Fragile and Hesitation Marks, which perhaps revisit some of those biographical elements, they're not necessarily saying, oh, I can just replicate that, because that's kind of generally the worst kind of art you can do,
Yeah. Can you, because I don't know how long I'll have to wait before I can kind of go back and casually listen to this album without overthinking it, maybe. Or maybe maybe I'll always overthink it. But are you able to kind casually listen in any normal way to this album, or do you kind of put it on the shelf for a little while?
Good question. It's hard to casually listen to the Downward Spiral.
I was going to say it's very hard.
That's a dumb question a little bit, yeah.
No, but it's funny, isn't it? Because it makes you sit up and take notice from the off, you know, and then it actually gets not necessarily more intense. It gets intense in a different, I think, more challenging way, and kind of grinds you down a little bit, from which you feel slightly tested. But yeah, in terms of going back to it, I bought during the process of writing the book, I bought the I think it was a 2017 for whatever reason remaster.
Yes.
On vinyl, and it's really, really good, and it has that cute thing where it's on 2 discs. You're like, oh my god, an LP on two individual records, and like 3 songs, and I have to flip it, but thankfully the songs are quite long and involved, so I get to immerse myself for a few tracks and then I flip it. But I thought the fidelity on it was really high. I have by way of weird comparison, I have a copy of the Beatles Blue album, the best of, which is like, it's like 67 to 70, I think. And for me, that's kind of the best of the Beatles, as opposed to the earlier poppier stuff. But it's so fucking good. Oh, sorry. So we're doing swearing? We are now. Okay.
Do a lot of
we can bleep it.
No, we swear a lot.
Okay, well, that's only one. So let's see how we go. We've only got ages. Yeah. Drink if you swear. Everyone has to drink. So that's how it is. And then you swear more. So yeah, I have that on LP, and the fidelity is really high, and like Strawberry Fields Forever is just super clear, and I feel I can hear the layers, and I'm in the music. I'm in the flow of where the music's going, and it's like, it's so immersive and it's so enjoyable. And I really got that with the LP version of the record. So that was kind of fun and sort of enjoyable, you know, to just like delve into that and hear it in a really different way, because I'm the generation that we obviously just had it on CD, and that was before MP3. It wouldn't have come out for a long time really, unless it was a pirate. And then I think, like what you say, you talk about things like the Fragile, you know, when you come to that record, it's much more, not even upbeat, it's just much more forceful, and there's much more drive to it, and there's so much more layering of textures from song to song to song, but then there are so many more songs. So even though it's 14 tracks, the Downward Spiral is really condensed and really intense. It's got that Holy Grail vibe, you know, that codex thing, this giant book like the Bible, Old Testament and New, double edition. And so when you come to the other stuff in Trent's discography, it's much, I wouldn't even say lighter, it's just much more like varied. And he's doing more with the music, and I think with the themes of the songs. So yeah, I think I definitely got like fatigued with the album, but it also helped me to appreciate the other records a lot more. Yeah,
for sure. Well, I jumped in really, really with maybe the heaviest thing I was going to ask, but maybe just more light and introductory. How did you first get into Nine Inch Nails and the Downward Spiral itself? I'm interested.
Great question. And that's a really challenging one as well. It's like, is it the gateway Nine Inch Nails album? I think it is, even though Pretty Hate Machine's really cool and really fun, and like, it's weird to listen back to it. You kind of think like, this is like Depeche Mode, but you know, Depeche Mode weren't really saying doing great strides at that stage. It was sort of, I think, after 1990, really, when they really like violated and they hit the stride. Anyway, sorry, I digress.
No, I agree.
I got into Downward Spiral listening to, I think, related music, but not necessarily directly related, because Trent Reznor collaborates a lot now, and he did in the early days. There was this stuff like, is it called Pigface, the spin-off project? Yeah, and then there's the other one that never actually, I don't think it ever saw the light of day. Oh God, Tapeworm. Was it?
Yep.
I don't know if Tapeworm actually came out anywhere.
It was shelved.
Yeah, but like, it was so good to just put it out for kicks.
I know.
Because everyone's just waiting for it. Like, why not? Like,
everything else has been
what
released,
has he got to lose?
like, via torrents. He's leaked things. For some reason, that one went sour in a way that could never see the light of day.
I'm sure it's actually really fun to just hear back on that kind of stuff. Anyway, sorry, to answer your question. Yikes. So yeah, I was listening to similar kind of stuff. Like, I think things like the Holy Bible, a bit of Pantera, just Marilyn Manson. And so things that kind of ran alongside Nine Inch Nails, but not necessarily preceded it, you know. And so for me, it was the kind of music that seemed really in tune with what I was interested in, but also the fact that it was just so sonically arresting. And I think there was, you know, in the early 90s, especially to the late 90s, there was a lot of varied, interesting music, and nu metal kind of took over towards the end of that decade, but there wasn't necessarily anything that was so sonically interesting and different and challenging and confrontational, I think, is the key thing. There was a lot of aims to please, especially within those nu metal bands. They were looking for the broadest kind of market, whereas the Downward Spiral doesn't really have a market, and yet it struck home with like millions of people and over time, and it's enduring, whereas some of those other records, they haven't lasted so well, you know?
Yeah, for sure. Okay, I have to get to some listener things.
Sure. I can talk less as well.
No, not at all. I just want to make sure we get these in. So, I'm going to try to do these in an order that makes some sort of narrative sense. Lauren asks, so during your research process, were there any challenges, maybe things like getting interviews, etc., or any memorable highlights during your research process?
Yeah, that's a tricky question. It's a good question. It's the right question to ask. I never really like set myself as a major authority on a Nine Inch Nails, etc. And I think some fans, not the majority, some fans would, and they're keen to correct people, and that's okay because they probably have read all the Wikipedia and all the interviews and everything. I never set myself as someone who knows the exact dates. I do my best, especially in the proofreading stage, but I'm not an expert per se. So I was really keen to reach out to Nine Inch Nails collaborators. I did go forward to speak to Trent Reznor, and I went through his management team and so on, and I just never really got a definite response. I didn't get a no, but I didn't get a yes either. So like a lot of people, I was kind of hanging in the breeze. And to be fair, I think it was like, there's this British guy writing a book for some American publisher about the album. Do you want to talk to him? And it's like, who is this guy? I'm doing all this other stuff now, new stuff, things like really amazing stuff, like the Social Network soundtrack was ages ago as well. It's like, I'm doing so much more new stuff. So I don't really probably have time to talk about that kind of thing. And I think what's fascinating for me, I don't know if anyone who's listening saw the Netflix Song Exploder episode about Hurt, which was really fucking good. And had some like archive photography and archive footage that I hadn't really come across before. Maybe it was out there somewhere, but I hadn't seen these weird little shots that seemed to be Trent just kicking around in the studio. And I was like, is that the Cielo Drive house? Is it the A&M studios? I just really, I think it's in Miami. I couldn't place a lot of the stuff. So I was like, wow, this is really something unique and different. And that's the power and the weight of Netflix and this Song Exploder series. And more power to them. But that was a great episode. And I was like, wow, if they did that on all the Nine Inch Nails songs, they'd have an amazing program. But that's not for me to say. I have neither the budget or the.
That'd be a great series. Just do every song in the style that they did Hurt, half an hour on each.
They spent like a neat. I think they spent like a cute 20 minutes, right? By the time you sift through some of the other.
They play the whole song at the end. That takes up time.
Yeah, exactly. It's Netflix, isn't it? It's like we have to pack it out. We've got a 27-minute show here, almost a full half hour. Sorry, but my point was that I don't think it was of interest to Reznor to speak to perhaps someone like me, but also to talk about the Downward Spiral when it's so long ago and it's such a bit of a time capsule thing that I was trying to do. I approached band members, a lot of people. What was weird with the Downward Spiral, and obviously you'll see this from the liner notes, there weren't really many people involved. There's lots of people doing bits and pieces, and there's key collaborators, and people like Sean Bevan, who I think he's listed as engineer because Trent's along with
Mulder.
Yeah, Alan Mulder and Flood. They're kind of the producers, but I think they're also kind of the engineers as well. I think Trent had like final say in a lot of stuff. And what's interesting is I think is it Flood or Alan Mulder who didn't work with Reznor after the downward spiral.
Flood
Yeah.
stopped because of the infamous
Just Do It track.
Just Do It Nike.
I talk about this in the book, so we don't have to cover it now. But all I'm saying is there was those guys. Sean Bevan is there as an engineer, but I think he was actually quite an instrumental guy. He was there a lot, and he was really great to talk to. He was really helpful. I spoke to Adrian Ballou, who fascinating guy to talk to just because he worked with David Bowie as well. And also he toured with him. And so that's a really interesting.
One of our favorite lines from your book, I think, is from the Ballou interview.
Yeah.
Jess, do you remember what he said about Talking Heads?
Oh, no, wait, you can talk.
I think the quote was, "It reminded me of Talking Heads' Remain in Light, a seminal album, which I also played on."
That's it, yeah.
Yeah, just dropped it in there.
Yep.
I mean, I didn't really, I'll be honest, I don't know Talking Heads that well. I know Remain in Light is a huge thing for Trent Reznor. So it's an amazing connection because it's just something I wasn't aware of again. But yeah, Adrian Ballou, and he was really lovely and helpful. And then other people like Danny Lona, who I think, to be fair, I don't know if he might be on the record in bits and pieces, but he was mainly around like touring and the early days of Nin. And he was like, I couldn't get a hold of him, but he would have been a great person to speak to. So yeah, you get these challenges as you try and approach people, and it's the angle at which you approach them. And I think sometimes they're out, well, you're just out to make a quick buck, or you want to hear something sordid about CLO Drive and stuff. And to be fair, all the sordidness of CLO Drive is there on the internet. You don't need to talk about it. It's just there in the cold, hard facts. Right. I just wanted to know what those guys think and felt about the record. But I wasn't able to speak to loads of people. Charlie Klauser also was very helpful. He came in much more instrumentally in the Fragile era, and he was on the tours, I think, towards the end. But yeah, he was on the Fragile, and then for a while with Nine Inch Nails. So people like that were, they were really supportive and helpful. But yeah, Trent Reznor himself remained the enigma. However, it gave me a lot of value as a writer. As I mentioned before, I used a lot of interview material, which not everyone has access to and is aware of, because you have to really kind of scour the internet and books for some of this stuff. So not having him directly involved meant that it was unofficial, not legit, as we might say in the UK, but that gives you a lot of freedom, not necessarily to speculate, but to work with other things that the person has said around the record. And rather than bring it up again and challenge them on it, it was saying, well, this was your statement here, here, and here. We can draw a common thread through the narrative of the record. So that was really useful and helpful. So in a weird way, it was kind of good that Trent Reznor didn't want to speak to me. I suppose I'm saying that. But from a journalistic perspective, it gave me a lot of freedom.
Yeah, I don't know how helpful he might have been. There's an interview he did a long time ago with Terry Gross when they were promoting The Social Network, and she would ask him questions about Pretty Hate Machine or about Downward Spiral. And he would say, like, I'm a different person now. I can't go back into my mind, when I was 24 years old and tell you what I was thinking then. So I guess it would depend upon the questions you would ask if you had gotten to speak with him.
Maybe he didn't like her vibe. I don't know. I like Terry Gross personally, but
I know. I just I do wonder that it's like it must be so hard. I can't imagine being in that position myself, of having like something that was like lauded, and then 20 years later, because you're a different person literally, and also you're doing something else. I wanted to put this in the book, but I love the idea about, I think it's every 10 or 11 years, at which point all of the cells in your body have completely decomposed and thus been regenerated, and so you're physically a new entity. Obviously you look a hell of a lot different. Just a decade. So yeah, I really like that concept as well, because it has this thing of like the record being, artifact and so on.
Right. Yeah, I was curious, and I don't want to create a huge tangent, but did you want to, or were you able to speak to Chris Vrenna?
No. Oh, yes, I did. I answered that in the wrong order. Oh, shit.
You wanted to.
Yes, I did. But no, I couldn't get hold of him. And like you say, like more than Sean Bevan, for example, Vrenna was like the housemate. And what's interesting about that is it would have been good to know his relationship with Trent at that time, because he was like the guy who I think was like keeping him sane, give or take, because they were there for a really long time. I know they did a lot of recording at A&M, but the timeline and exactly how many months each space isn't really clear. Maybe someone out there knows it and has it in black and white, but I think overall the album is kind of a year, and for that period, that was quite a long time. I think in the early 90s, and now it's like I need a 2-year gap between albums. But to be fair, that's probably like touring exhaustion and things like that. I think there's a lot more media attention on artists now, whereas back then you didn't have social media or really the internet in 94 or 93. So, Chris Venner would have been really good, but no, I couldn't track him down. And he fulfilled so many roles within the record.
Yeah.
But like I say, I think it seems that he was much more of a supportive friend and a critical voice that Trent Reznor could trust and refer back to. And that's really valuable in itself. And then there's the crazy anecdote of, the poor guy having to watch loads of laser discs. I don't know anyone who has a laser disc player, but I'm sure at the time it was the shit. And, he had to just sit there and watch loads of movies and find little bits of samples, of which there are not tons,
That's the thing about his role in the album. Well, I heard it was VHS tapes, like thousands of them. The story changes every time, but it's a recent thing for me that I'm realizing maybe Chris Vrenna's role in the sound of that album is part of what makes it unlike any other album, and maybe he's more integral to the whole thing than we ever gave him credit for, because he was the one finding all these sounds that kind of made Downward Spiral what it is.
Yeah, it almost sounds like an engineering type role or a producer type role, of which, on this album, there wasn't really a band. There was drummers who were in and out. There was a couple of people who played bits of drums on bits of tracks. And Reznor claimed he played all the guitar himself, apart from Baloo. So, you have these like great swathes of instrumentation. But I think someone like Vrenna was there helping set up the amps. Let's get these pedals. Let's try this configuration pedals. And Reznor talks a lot. It's a really organic method. He's like, found a sound he liked in the pedals, and then he kind of riff on it with the guitar. And if you're that far sighted in like 93, that you can see a way of making music is, if you're not the virtuoso instrumentalist, but you have them around you, you make a piece of music or sound, and then you sample it, and then you reference it, or you chop it up, or you delay it, you make it into something new, and then you sample that, and that pops up in and out of the tracks and so on. So it becomes completely alien kind of guitar. And there's so little moments on the album where there is a riff or there is a chord structure that you can go dum 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 dum, and it doesn't go back to a repetition of the verse, or it doesn't just drop into the chorus based upon that chord progression. I'm not a technically minded person. It's just that you don't hear those kind of standardized things very much on the album. So it was more about working with sound as opposed to songwriting practices.
Yeah, absolutely. More about looping and sampling than I think any of us realized until we, read more about how it was actually made and stuff.
Yeah, because there wasn't a band. There was no band there. Yeah. There was a live room with no one in it.
Right, and they were just hitting drums, smacking them a single time, not really playing pretending to play a drum kit by sampling the drum sounds and sequencing them. And
yeah, and it's why you have Reznor doing that amazing drum solo at the end of Piggy, and it goes out of time, which Brian Eno did a lot as well. But you have this like thing where he's playing the drums and he's just going for it, really, hitting them harder than perhaps he needs to, and also letting the sound ride out and himself fall out of time and trying to pull it back in, but also just going with it, going with the motions of it. And that was just something he put on the record. It wasn't supposed to be perfect. It wasn't supposed to be a great performance, but in its own broken, weird way, it is a great performance. And yet it's not technically what a song should have. And that perhaps kind of speaks to the whole record,
Yeah, the Piggy drum solo worked completely by accident, is what I've heard, and it just got left on because it ended up being the right thing for it, I guess.
The wrong thing at the right time.
Yeah, I guess so. in regards to research, Holly asked if there were any funny stories that didn't make it into the book. Anything that's like on the cutting room floor of the book that maybe you wanted to include but didn't?
Oh, it's a good question.
Or did you put it all out there? Did you leave nothing on the field?
What's the smart answer? You tell me.
I don't know. Make up something really funny that.
Yeah, make up something. Yeah, that's the answer to most situations. It's like make up something fun or funny. You can go with anything. I had to cut the book down a lot. I had like 100K words and so on. And the book is a generous 80-ish thousand. And like the publisher is like, oh, crikey. I didn't say crikey. But this is pretty long. And then I was like, yeah, it's a really dense album. It's really intense. There's loads to say about it. I've really enjoyed it. It's been exciting. You know, it's been a slightly swashbuckling yarn, the writing of the whole damn thing. And then it's going to be a book. So yeah, to cut it down from 100K was hard. I tried to just refine what I thought the fans would appreciate and enjoy and get something out of. And ideally to either show them my own personal insights, reflections for what it's worth as a listener and a fan, and to maybe like throw in a few crazy facts and coincidences that I come across along the way. So I think in that regard, generally the book kind of succeeds. But obviously if I'd had like more access to people like Trent Reznor, who knows what kind of crazy project it could have grown into. And like I said before, I think it could have kind of hamstrung it, because I could have ended up getting loads of great interview stuff from Trent, and it just becomes Trent said this, whereas I use a lot of quotes, but I think I kind of merge them into the text. Whereas if Trent just had his opportunity to riff on his own record, God forbid, the poor guy might end up getting like edited to fuck, and then he would perhaps feel cut out of his own story. And also, it's perhaps for people like me, the later generation than him, the fans, followers, to go after and like examine how it was for us and what it meant to us and so on, rather than for him to say, recording it was kind of like this, because maybe that wouldn't resonate with so many people. I don't know. But yeah, I don't know if there were many funny moments in the recording of that album. It's a damn good question.
Tommy Lee and the Steakhouse, did you learn anything really funny about that?
I never found a definitive end, should we say, to that particular situation, because it was something around him fucking a groupie. And I think I don't think it's in the liner notes, but it's in the text somewhere. It's about him fucking a groupie, and it was sampled and referred to as steakhouse. Yeah. Which I don't know if that's a euphemism for sex in certain states. Yeah, which states?
No clue.
Indeed, we need a psychogeographer for this kind of work. But something greasy and torrid and sordid, all the best things in life thrown into this weird little moment. And that's perhaps Tommy Lee's greatest contribution to music.
I think
certainly not his drumming. And it's this weird little thing. And so there's not necessarily many funny moments along that stuff. And yeah, you have to appreciate, I think, when you talk about the camaraderie of the guys being at the studio, the way Adrian Belew talked about it and Sean Bevan talked about it, like, oh, it's 4, 5 in the morning. Oh, geez, sun's coming up. Let's all go have a coffee out front and watch the sun rise up. Because they've been up all night working really hard on the album, probably doing some really dark, heavy shit. And yet the next morning, the sun also rises and you can be like, oh, I feel really proud of what I did today. I don't think I can necessarily sell it to my mum and dad. I don't think I can necessarily play it with my girlfriend or my wife or my partner. But I did some great art today, and it's dark as fuck, and it's really challenging. And loads of people were like, I don't understand it. I don't like it. But, maybe it'll sell a few thousand copies and will touch a few hearts and minds. But yeah, poor old Sean and the lads, they had this really intense bonding, close working experience. And they produced this like unique masterpiece. And yet they don't necessarily have to feel sad about it. It wasn't necessarily a torturous, challenging, difficult thing. They just worked really fucking hard. And perhaps that comes through.
I think it really does. Do you want to read the 2-part one from Jody?
Jody says, I would first like to say thanks to Adam for being a great friend to those of us who are fans of Nine Inch Nails on Instagram and interacting with us. It means a lot. And for filling in the gap of Nine Inch Nails books, there aren't many, and the ones that existed before Into the Never were either quotes from magazine articles or fabricated biographies that weren't really worth the paper on which they were written. So here are the questions. Were you prepared for the response you got from Nine Inch Nails fans? Everyone I've spoken to who has read it says they love how thoroughly researched and lovingly and painstakingly put together it is. You can tell when someone loves their subject, and it shows that you really love Nine Inch Nails.
I think so. She obviously really wants to convey to you that she loves the book. I think the question here is, how has the response been, and kind of did you expect that response maybe?
Yeah, good question. Thanks, Jody. That's really kind.
Yeah.
It's really nice. Yeah. Sorry, I'll gush first, then I'll be cool.
No, absolutely.
But no, that's really nice of you to say. And I think one of the things that's challenging is like there weren't many Nine Inch Nails books before me. Daphne Carr's was amazing. The other one by where's it gone? Something Huxley. Oh fuck! I hope he's not alive.
Martin?
No, I hope he's alive. But yeah, maybe. Martin Huxley. It was on 97, and then the poor chap Tommy Udo had a book in 99. He's no longer with us, unfortunately. But both those books, all three of those books, if I'd say, I did reference and I drew things from, and I even just got like a jumping off point. So they weren't necessarily what I wanted from a Nine Inch Nails book, which kind of spurred me on. But it's fair to say, like I did reference them, and they did give me like an angle and information. Do you know what I mean? So like, I know what Jodie means, and I think I know what she's trying to say about those things, but I have to acknowledge the fact that like I'm kind of like, you refer as like standing on the shoulders of giants. It's printed on the side of a £1 coin. Not helpful for you guys. I appreciate that, but it's just something to consider in terms of, I'm kind of grateful there were other people that had done some stuff in the past and some research, especially Daphne Carr, to be fair, and shown some real insight, because that spurred me on to try and do something else with it because there was an appetite and so on. But in terms of Jodie's actual question, I think generally fans have been really positive. I got a really funny review because I do check the reviews.
I was going to ask. If you read your reviews.
Of course not. Yeah, no, of course I do. I would get my secretary to do it for me, but I don't have a fucking secretary. I do read reviews here and there. And there was a really funny one on Amazon where this guy's like, obviously he called himself Mr. Black.
It's Johnny Cash.
Yeah, but from the grave. So I feel really creeped out now. But I can't sleep because it's one Amazon review, just because it might be the soul of a dead country musician.
Right.
He's after me, obviously. I'm the one he has to settle score with, right? Come on, there's a cue. And this guy's like, Frank Zappa said that rock music criticism is shit because they can't write, and they're talking to people who don't know anything. And there's no point talking about music because you can't talk about it anyway. I kind of agree with it. I think he's got a point. You can't necessarily write about music. And fuck me, I said this at the start of the book, so disclaimer. But I think generally the response was really positive, really nice, really constructive, and like people saying, it's nice that you wrote about stuff that I was really interested in. And it didn't necessarily have to reflect their personal feelings, but they knew that someone else found the album really important. And perhaps in some way, it gave some insights to aspects of the album that they didn't know about, or that they hadn't perhaps considered before. And that's the nice thing about it. Like, we're all learning. I had to do a shitload of learning in order to write the damn thing. So I like to think that what I gave people in the book is a gateway that opened them up to other influences and other ideas that for me came through the album personally, and then things that were objectively there, like more about the history of Cielo Drive and the connections with the Beatles and just the whole Helter Skelter concept and how that indirectly tied into Manson's own derangement, and then that informed Marilyn Manson, the protege of Nine Inch Nails. I mean, fuck me, there wouldn't be Marilyn Manson without Nine Inch Nails. And he's not a musician, and he's not really much of an artist. He's more of a promoter. He's okay at lyrics. He likes David Bowie. We all like David Bowie. Trent Reznor likes David Bowie. So fuck me, Marilyn Manson, he's okay. I kind of like the Coma White album. I don't know what it's called, Mechanical Animals. I kind of like it, but he is massively overestimated within himself.
Yeah.
Obviously, he can have a lawsuit on that, but it's just a fact. So you can never disprove it legally. But all I'm saying is, it's really interesting how some people will take a certain aesthetic and other people will take it another way. And Trent Reznor is first and foremost a musician and an artist, whereas other people are perhaps more imitators and rely on aesthetic above the art itself, which is not the same thing.
Right.
But yeah, thanks for your question, Jody. That was really nice.
Yeah, thank you for sure. I have to get to this one from Melissa. You might know her. Also in the UK, she runs the Nin feed.
Yes, she's really friendly.
Yeah, extremely friendly. She helped promote us when we got started. I know she promotes you.
Yeah, she's a serious Nine Inch Nails fan.
Oh yeah,
Nice.
She's wild about them. She wanted to know if there were any non-NIN books. So we've talked about the previous NIN books. Any other books that inspired you to write this, or inspired you as you wrote it?
Oh, that's a great question. Do you know what? That's a really good question. Yes, I happen to have one just by my side, as if I knew the question was coming. Revolution in the Head, by a chap called Ian MacDonald, who's no longer with us. Now, I think this is the kind of book, everyone knows who the fucking Beatles are. You don't have to like the Beatles to enjoy this book. Weirdly, he puts in loads of music theory. Bear with me. Don't switch off, dear listeners. Don't change the velocitator on your radio set.
Right.
That's how it works now. I don't know. It's a really fucking great book that I came across through another podcast called Backlisted. But the point is, Revolution in the Head is an individual breakdown, song by song, of Beatles songs. And it really inspired me that you don't have to talk just about music theory. You can talk with passion and intensity about lyrical content, which is there for all to see, but also you can talk about what the song means to you and how it makes you feel, and emotional, personal resonances that it might have with your own life. For example, mental health concerns, body trauma, suicide, all these kind of things. So not in the Beatles so much, and more in Nine Inch Nails, I'll be honest. But it was a book that really struck me. And so it's recommended. And so I read that while I was working on this book, and it really helped me not necessarily change the direction of the book, but just like shift my perspective. Like there's so much more we can say as listeners, and it doesn't come from the artist like Trent Reznor. It comes from the people who are fans and how they react to the music. And perhaps that is the more valuable stuff to the artist than their own reflection upon, oh yeah, I think I used this Boss fuzz pedal, but maybe it was a line 6 pedal. Because we all love that kind of stuff. But I left a lot of techie things out of the book, A, because it's not my area, and B, because it's not necessarily resonant with people. So yeah, that was a big book. And I did put a reading list on my website. I mean, I think I put the full bibliography up there, which is actually really long and really dense, but it does have web links. So if you want to go and find a really good interview with Alec Wilkinson in the New Yorker or the New York Times, they're the same thing to me. This really good fucking journalist spent a lot of time with Trent Reznor, talking to him more as a person and as a musician, things like that. It's all on my website. So you can link back to what I found and what inspired me. And I think like that's a really valuable resource for fans. And I did use some really great websites while we're talking about books and stuff, where people had put there's like NIN archives. I think it's the German website .de .deutsch.
Yeah.
Deutschland. They have a really good archive of like all this stuff from the 90s and then into the 2000s, and it's like individual magazine articles and things like Spin and so on. Weirdly, Spin is still alive. but
Is
not as a magazine.
I think online.
I think it's a website.
Yeah.
That makes sense. That's how they all
But
are now.
It's really hard to find those things broadly, whereas you go to these archives, it's all there. So I was really grateful to them because I could kind of cherry pick my era of what I was looking at. But yeah, Revolution in the Head is amazing. Daphne Carr's 33 and a Third was very helpful because Daphne did this great article where she talks about I and you and me. And in relation to Reznor's discography overall, he shifts from being very self-absorbed, all about me. I'm a teenager type character, and all this anguish and pain is within me, and then moves to a broader social sphere. And I don't think that art should necessarily be political to be valid and interesting. But obviously, he made more political albums, but it wasn't that. It was that he created a greater emotional resonance and reflection with his listeners, even on things like The Fragile, And by which time it was really weird because they were The Fragile, The Wretched, that was his fan base. It's really strange. Like it was a cult, but not something that he intended.
Yeah, I spend enough time in the fan base now that cult-like is not a totally unfair descriptor. So, it
depends on the person, right? Yeah, you meet different people within the group or the audience, should we say? Yeah. But yeah, it was really good to push for books like that. And there's weird things like I think there's a film. It's not Leviathan because that's one of the samples, like a sci-fi
reptile.
Sample. But the point is, it's really hard to find Reznor's literary influences. I don't think, broad strokes, he's the most well-read guy, and that's not about intelligence. It's about perhaps academic intelligence. I think he's more of an emotionally intelligent person. If you were going to profile him from what he does and how he works, it's nothing about spectrums and so on. It's just he works more as an intuitive musician. He's a player. He's classically trained. He can hear keys. He can hear modes and so on. And he can work within that framework and he can find the emotional resonance within it. None of that has anything to do with books. He doesn't necessarily talk about those kind of things very much. And I think that is reflective of just the kind of person he is, and that's okay. It's easy for other people to perhaps criticize that as being a limited worldview, but I just don't think he's a huge reader. I think he's a big listener.
I feel very validated as someone who's maybe not the most well-read guy, but I still want to be seen as smart. So thank you.
But don't you think we get a lot from things like the Downward Spiral? We get a lot of inspiration and ideas and reflections from what we've listened to. And then even things like the Closer video, which is full of artistic references. Yep. And a lot of that came from Mark Romanek, to be fair. But Romanek was written off as a glossy, celebrity-endorsed videographer, as opposed to an artist in his own right. And, the Closer video is a work of art.
Yeah. Look at the stuff before Closer. I mean, Jess knows more about than I do, but all the glossy Madonna stuff that looks nothing like Closer. It was always good, but he had done nothing like that. Anyway, well, thank you. We just sold 10,000 copies of Revolution in the Head. Is that what it was called?
Yep. Revolution in the Head by Ian MacDonald. Unfortunately, he's dead. He died before his time, the poor chap. But it's a great fucking book. And it genuinely blew my mind. And I liked the idea that you didn't have to be a big Beatles fan because you kind of know the songs. You can't help it because the bloody 20th century is knocking on your door all the time. But I liked the fact that he made the songs new for you in his writing. And that's a real skill.
Just before I do more self-indulgent Blake questions, do you have any?
Well, I mean, kinda. We were talking about Daphne Carr and the different types of maybe Nine Inch Nails fans. And I was listening to a podcast that she guested on. It was around the time that Nine Inch Nails were inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, because it was a podcast that was talking about kind of the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. And I don't know if you've heard this one, but she was talking about how when she was writing the book, the 33 and a Third series on Pretty Hate Machine, she said in this interview, for people who haven't read the book, it's kind of more of a sociological study of Cleveland and of the 80s, that era, a post-Reagan kind of era, and
the Rust Belt.
Yeah, the Rust Belt in general. And so for each song, she would interview maybe a different fan and ask about their perspectives on the track. And so she was talking about, in this interview, she was writing the book, I think, like in 2008-ish, maybe. She was talking about how it was the first time as a journalist that she felt uncomfortable interviewing men. And she said that she felt afraid several times, that the men she was talking to seemed to be unused to talking to women. They seemed resentful. They referred to women in the third person. They seemed to really hate women. And to them, Reznor's music affirmed that women were just kind of terrible people and they can't be thought of as fully human. These are all her insights, by the way. I don't know that anyone said this to her. These were just kind of her insights from interviewing. And you also talked about in your book a little bit about incel culture, and things about, of course, these terms weren't used in the 90s. And if they were maybe like toxic masculinity, that kind of thing.
They didn't even have that term. They just called it chauvinism and whatever.
I mean, there might have been in some kind of academia that we're not fully aware of. I mean, some of these terms have existed for a while. They just weren't mainstream. I guess I don't really know what my question is on this. I just think it's an interesting thing to think about, the interpretation of music, right? We've talked before, well, no, we haven't, but I mean, Columbine, toxic masculinity, young boys taking out aggression, and later the press turning it into a music situation and blaming Nine Inch Nails and blaming Marilyn Manson. And I guess, have you ever experienced anything like that? I mean, you're in the fandom, have you ever experienced any kind of really negative fan base who maybe don't seem to does there seem to be an inordinate amount of people like that?
Misogynistic fan base? Yeah,
in the Nine Inch Nails fan base? Or
it's a really good question.
Are people really, really, really misinterpreting a lot of, because she also kind of stated that she would never want to write a bigger project or work with Reznor because she feels like he wouldn't want to work or open up to women journalists, which I don't know if that's true or not, because he has done several interviews with like Lizzie Goodman recently, been on her podcast and seems to be opening up to her quite a bit recently. So I'm not certain. I just don't know if you've come across that yourself in your research or in your own, and just kind of being in the fan world. Yeah. So
yeah, it's a really good point, and it's a really broad challenge, isn't it? It's like I think, like I say, I think Daphne Carr did really good work with her book. What was, I think, challenging, I think, for a general reader, is that a lot of it was like individual reports from people that she met. And it was a lot of like challenged, damaged, lonely guys who happened to live in the Rust Belt. Mm-hmm. And we're talking about like Cleveland and the surrounding areas of Ohio, even obviously Cleveland itself. But I don't think there's loads going on there work-wise. I don't know about now, but it's not a rich part of America.
No.
And the background would be working class. And then obviously, like in the UK, where the work is removed, you still have a working class, but they don't have opportunities to work. And that's the challenge in that. But yeah, I think things like Nine Inch Nails, because it is so, even in the early years, it's so upfrontly aggressive and exciting and intense. I think it would perhaps attract more of a testosterone environment, testosterone-driven audience. But at the same time, there's been a lot of people made a case about women very into that music, and they feel that I'm aggressive too. I want my aggression to be acknowledged as chiming with that kind of music and that kind of stuff. However, at the same time, I think they're excluded physically, perhaps from things like the mosh pit, but also they're perhaps excluded in perspective. And that's not necessarily something that we would level at Trent Reznor, right?
Yes.
It's just that the musics were like, a lot of the early music was like me, I, even the Fragile, it's like really like a kind of torture spiral thing about him and autobiographical spillover. And that book was good because it tried to show the people that like that kind of music, this is their sociological reality, especially in terms of employment and what their future is going to look like. And so maybe some people would kind of say like they're like trailer trash kind of people in terms of they have no prospects and they're uneducated, but they appreciate the music or it resonates with them emotionally. And that doesn't make them lesser fans and such, obviously. But I think societally, it makes them count less for some people. And it's a great thing, actually. We think about it, we talk about when that book was published, is like, where are they now? Or when are they now? Like, what happens to people? Maybe they're not with us for various reasons, And I think obviously Daphne Carr did her due diligence and stuff in her research, but she was trying to reach out to fans that were like Outcast fans. You're like, I love this fucking rock music. I find it really uplifting and it engages me and it speaks to who I am. And I feel great when I go to the concert. And I feel my really emotionally reinforced when I have some of my challenging experiences reflected back at me because I'm not so alone. But it's tough to think about what's next for them. And that's nothing to do with Nine Inch Nails and Trent Reznor. He can't manage those kind of things.
I mean, you put the art out there and you can't control how it's interpreted or who listens to it or, what is done.
And I don't think he's going to make them commit suicide. I think their situation made them commit suicide. But it's just they perhaps took from it what they needed or wanted to take from it. And that's not saying the artist is not responsible for anything, but it's just that I don't think that's what the music was about, Yeah. So, it's really interesting, the Daphne Carr research. I just think what's challenging is the book was about like Pretty Hate Machine, and then it kind of spanned things like The Fragile and so on. And that's a really different era, and that was a really different audience as well, because there was some audience there from the start. I was there in 89 or 87 when it was Exotic Birds or whatever. I was there all the way through. And other people bought The Fragile because it was the big double major LP and stuff. But obviously that one didn't sell anywhere near as well statistically as the Downward Spiral. So it's a really interesting shift and convergence because The Fragile is really fucking good. Like if you just take each album in isolation, they're both really good. So it's surprising that you could almost call The Fragile more middle of the road, but it was a double album. And people don't relate to double albums because they have to straddle not a disc change, but in the LPs, it's like, I think it's 9 LPs. Is it 6? I don't know. My maths is bad. People struggle to make the leap from so many themes and variations and challenges to the next bit of the next record and so on. And it's just fucking long, People don't necessarily have the time for it. And yet it is one of those rare things, like the Downward Spiral, it works really well listened to continuously, because it makes so much more sense as a margin of density. Did I answer your question properly? I'm not sure.
Yeah, when I heard that, it was when we were discussing starting the podcast, and I had quite a bit of fear going into it because I was like, oh man, I don't know. I mean, I've never met anyone, but I've never put myself in those spaces. I'm not big on Reddit, I'm not big in Discord. I've never been big, in the early days, like on fan sites.
It might have been an earlier day problem too, like rampant misogyny maybe has died down a little bit in this particular fandom, not gone away completely, but maybe less. But
I'm just saying, I have not encountered anything so far in any kind of interactions.
To address that briefly, because I've sharpened my mind to it now. I think you're right. I think I might have referred to like gym bros in the book, maybe once, maybe twice. So I read a fair bit of Chuck Palahniuk and Fight Club guy. We'll throw that out there for the listeners. Sorry. And I thought Nine Inch Nails are an interesting phenomenon because I don't think Trent Reznor reflects that thing. It's not that he's so vast and so subtle and so genius. It's just that I don't think he was ever a part of a particular thing. He made his own thing, and that's what made it so interesting. And obviously, a bit like David Bowie, he played around the early days with gender, representation and S&M and dominance and power dynamics and stuff. So when it comes to incel, it wasn't really invented when he started, right?
Yep.
And the reason I put that kind of stuff in the book, it was like, well, fuck me, my generation are just like living through either the aftermath or a refraction of that kind of thing, of sexual violence and male dominance, and the idea that guys need to reassert themselves, and that will somehow balance out the culture because it's gone too soft.
Yeah, bit reactionary there.
Of course, yeah. And in terms of people getting very upset in both sides of the continental divide about things like BLM, and what makes me angry to hear is that people say, well, you're telling me Black Lives Matter, but white lives matter too. But the point is that white lives never mattered in the same way that Black lives always have. So you didn't experience slavery as a culture because you're white, and other people's ancestors did, and they're traumatic inheritors of that legacy, and thus they're living through something from the past, whereas you just want equivalency, but you don't want equivalency on an equal basis. I've gone on a fucking tangent. I'm really sorry. But my point is...
It's all about...
okay. I was asking some weird questions.
Anyone
there.
who listens to our show has to love tangents because it's all we do for hours and hours and hours.
And here we are.
I'll just take it in a different direction. Coming down to the last few here, I had to get my own question in because I became a little bit obsessed with a thing you said. You said what I call the triple M, and now in discussing Nine Inch Nails music,
brings it up every time.
Yeah, I keep doing this. The man-machine mystique, and I'm actually, and it's in my favorite chapter where you talk about all the tech stuff, and you say you're not techie, but of course my favorite chapter is the techie chapter.
Yeah, that's fine.
I'm actually doing another podcast called Discographology. Right now we're doing the discography of Kraftwerk. I know later in the book you mention Kraftwerk because they have an album called Man Machine. I wanted to know when you said Man Machine mystique, referring to Trent Reznor's The Phenomenon of is it a synthesizer that sounds like a guitar, or is it a guitar that sounds like a synthesizer?
Mm-hmm. We still debate things like this.
That's the triple M. Were you thinking of Kraftwerk when you wrote that?
Totally.
Okay, excellent.
End of discussion. Switch off.
Yes,
I'll be
that's
out.
great.
I'm gone.
I'm glad to know.
No, absolutely. That's a good question. I'd be fair. Like I think I borrowed / stole the phrase, but they nailed it down into what I think they called like an autonomy of music. But they didn't think their music lacked heart, and things like The Model doesn't lack heart. It's like it's a ballad by another name in another medium, right?
Yeah.
And I had that CD in my car. I'm not a huge Kraftwerk expert, but like because that was a later album. It was more commercial,
right?
And it's not commercial, but things like Neon Lights, it's like so soothing, so ambient, and it has the physiological effect of moving under a series of neon lights on a stripway, on a highway, and they're just there, dum dum, and it has that beat and that vibe. So you feel that shit from Kraftwerk. But the man-machine dynamic, it's really interesting because it was kind of laid out for Reznor beforehand. But I think one of the challenging things about the downward spiral, and I think you mentioned this to me before, is that it's the question of the man versus technology type challenge. And is the narrative of the album that a person is slowly being taken over, like, Akira style, Akira style, by technology, and they're being subsumed by things that they can't necessarily control, but they thought they were the master of? Or is it the person perceives themselves as some kind of megalomaniac god over all of these things? And technology is there to serve them, but it is only through technology they can actually express themselves, not on a one-to-one, face-to-face human basis. they can't necessarily connect and engage with people, and it's perhaps through music or what would emerge as programming and so on, that they could find some kind of common language and also be relevant in other people's eyes. I think that's a really interesting thing. Like you talk about like the rise of like geek culture and cosplay and things like that. Those things were very uncool, and now it's like, well, those people were working really hard and building a big part of your culture, and you didn't realize it, and it crept into the mainstream and became really significant and influential, but also showed you new possibilities of a new future that you hadn't reckoned upon before.
Right.
To bring it back to Nine Inch Nails a bit, sorry.
Yeah.
I just think that people perhaps underestimated a band like Nine Inch Nails because they were industrial. And that is one side of the sound. But obviously, given all the soundtrack work since then, it's like such a broader, weirder, more dynamic, evasive thing. You can't really pin it down. And I love that idea because, like, you know, to be fair, Trent Reznor's that kind of age of where he can do a lot of things. He can do more Nine Inch Nails records, but they're not going to be like the old ones because he's a different person, as he said several times. But he can be an artist in different ways. And it's like, I really admire someone who can do those different things.
Yeah, absolutely. Me too. We have listener ones that kind of nicely wrap it up, but Jess, is there anything that we didn't get to before we do the closeout questions?
I can't think of anything off the...
Okay.
Go for it, Jess. I'm here.
Okay.
And make the time.
Yeah, I do think maybe we wouldn't have a Nine Inch Nails if we didn't have the man-machine mystique, the triple M of Kraftwerk before them. You know, I've said that on the other podcast. Maybe NIN would not exist if not for bands like Kraftwerk.
True.
Both a couple people, Jamie and Rob, asked, would you write a book on another Nin album in the future? And kind of to go with that, both Jody and Daniel asked, would you write a book on any other musician? So kind of a two-parter there, but another Nin album in the future, would you do a book? Or would you prefer doing one on a different musician altogether, or both?
I love the left-right.
Yeah, got it.
Obviously, I would do being an artistic person, I would do a non-book. That's the only thing I can offer to the audience. So, you know, some kind of like NFT or
no.
faxes. You have to buy a fax in order to get my words, and they'd be like, hello. I'm like, oh shit, I can't wait for next week. He said hello. You know, they're waiting on my every excretions.
Right.
No, it's a really interesting question. When I did the project, I love Nine Inch Nails. And it's not my only band, obviously. My other band is My Extreme Features. I'm completely divided and people hate me for it. But I was like, well, I've done that. And I move on to something else. You know, carpentry, undertaker, chef. But not at the same time. You know, will you have the charcoal quail? No, it's inedible. But it will clean you out. You might die, but you'll feel great for a while. So I ruled out those possibilities, and I did think to myself like, oh, it'd be good to do a music book. However, I signed up to do a Nick Cave project and a David Bowie thing about what is perhaps my favorite David Bowie album, Scary Monsters and Supergroups.
Jessica has a particular affinity for that one, I think.
Of 1980. But all that being said, I am really interested in doing something about the Fragile. And people said to me, like, in some of the reviews, they're really kind. They're like, do you think, not like, would you please, begging and so on, just like, do you think you might do the Fragile? Because it's like, there's loads to talk about with that. And it was just like fans on forums and things. And I was like, oh, I don't know, is there? Because it's such a like, in so many ways, it's such a slicker, more streamlined beast and stuff. It's because Trent had entered the industry at a really major level then, and there was such massive expectation in the album, which it didn't necessarily fulfill. It's crazy because it was 99, and I think it sold like 450,000 copies off the cuff. It didn't break 1 million, which they thought would definitely break 1 million. And if you break 2 million, that's a good day. And then there was things like Radiohead with Kid A and Amnesiac. I don't know if Kid A was 99 or 2000. It was
2000, I believe.
Yeah. And that was like, boom, massive sales.
Mm-hmm.
And everyone's like, some people are like, this is a shit album, but they're like, this is completely different to what I expected. But I love that
an argument in this household over whether Kid A is good or bad. One of us is on one side, one of us is on the other.
Kid A, I don't.
It's not my place to.
It's not the.
You don't want to get involved in that. I don't mean to derail.
I don't want to cause anything. It's very good.
Right. So the Fragile then can I tell people that may be in the pipeline then?
I'd like to.
Okay.
There's nothing happening, but I would like to, because I saw it and I was like, there's so much to be said upon it.
Yeah.
In contrast to the Downward Spiral. And it's so fucking crazy that Trent had this massive gap, and yet he still had this really, I talk about this in the book, he had this really harsh, definitive crash, towards the end of 2000.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a really difficult period. And I don't, like I say, like with the Downward Spiral book, I don't want to dwell upon biography and stuff, because I think it's A, quite personal, and B, I think we're beyond that as listeners. We don't want to know about like how much of a massive racist Eric Clapton is. He is. From,
we already know that. We know all that.
Yeah.
He because of him, they started the Rock Against Racism movement. It's like, fuck's sake, Eric. And he's like, what did I do? What did I do?
Just one guy. Yep.
Yeah, I was only a bit racist. It's like, oh, man. Anyway, he never apologized for it. Sorry, this is
of course not.
But what I'm saying is, there's really different like phases in music, and you don't necessarily want to go on about like what happened with the person individually, because so much more interesting to talk about the record. You can go into the record. That's what fans really resonate with. I think they want to know Trent Reznor's favorite foot fungal cream when he was struggling on tour. He's like, it's really itching wearing boots every night and big socks. But what they really want to know is like what was on his mind when he wrote Just Like You Imagined, and what drove him, what was frustrating him. Maybe it was foot irritation. Maybe it was something else. That's possible, right?
Yeah.
And I think like The Fragile is really rich and really interesting, and it was the big progression to the next thing. And it's so strange because commercially it's viewed as a failure, but no one looks at it like that. No one who likes Nine Inch Nails, no one who bought it. It's accrued millions over the years of sales, but at the time it was a relative failure, and it's intriguing that was possible. But there was a massive lag.
The tour was considered a failure too, right? The
did not sell
Fragility
out.
Tour did
maybe?
not sell out big arenas.
I didn't know that. I didn't know that.
It was kind of a disappointing, lackluster.
And you think by then people would be desperate to see Nine Inch Nails, but it was almost like it was a massive valence gap, and it was too big, right? It was too much to sustain the audience of that era. And yet now, like, Nine Inch Nails is so big, and the challenging argument is, have they made an album to best the Downward Spiral, the Fragile? A lot of us, I think, would say no, but they made really good stuff along the way, and they still make good stuff that's really challenging and provocative. And it's not about comparison anymore. It's about, like, are they an artist who is working hard or resting on their laurels? Like, they never tried to do the Downward Spiral 2. They never tried to do a repeat of the Fragile, which is, like, the Fragile is such a crazy album. It's incommensurable to your mind that they could try and do something like that. And that's what makes it great art, I think, that you can't necessarily say, I'll fucking knock off a Fragile double record, because it doesn't, what would that even look like? It'd be such a like lazy ass mess. It wouldn't make sense. And Hesitation Marks was an interesting thing because it was 2013 and there was so much critical distance, and it's almost like Rezn's talking about, okay, this is me talking about how I was then, but talking about it now with all my experience on all my creative development. And it's kind of a poppy record, but it's really good and interesting in its own right.
I love Hesitation Marks. So
yeah, me too. And I can't explain entirely why I love it, because it's quite not Nine Inch Nails. It's not very guitar-y. It's not very distorted. It's just, it shows a lot of dynamic,
yeah,
a lot of flex.
It's trying different things. Lindsey Buckingham.
I don't know. What's he doing? Adrian Belew to Lindsey Buckingham. But
Yeah, he's the new Adrian. Yeah.
Sorry, I've gone on a tangent.
No.
But I'd like to do another book. I don't know if there's a readership. I don't know if there's a publisher for it. But it'd be interesting to see.
Well, I'd be in the readership as The Fragile may be my favorite. It's hard to say. I know a lot of people are with me on this, so it's not just me. I hear it on the internet. But
the internet, oh my God, 10. That's double my readership.
But I'm very interested, excited and scared to get into the Fragile stuff on podcasting.
Yeah. Because it's huge, right?
Yeah,
it's so big.
It's too big. It's almost too big. So that's maybe not a direct plug. I mean, you wanna plug your own career any more substantially or directly than that? Anything else we should know about?
Yeah, I was trying to find your first novel, and I couldn't find it in a way to buy in a physical format. I was looking for it.
I think, do you know what? I think it might even be out of print, but like, I don't know if anyone in America bought a copy.
I just heard about it today, so.
Anyone bought a copy? I don't think so. I'll send you one.
Okay.
That would be awesome.
Look, here you go. You can have this one.
Okay, awesome.
Ship
I'll Venmo you.
over.
Give me your Venmo and I'll.
But the
I'll
cute thing is, I'm not like a crazy guy with like my house is just books and like I sold my wife and my dog and my car and my house is full of books now.
I see a small.
I have a real life, not just a house full of books.
It looks like a healthy amount of books on the shelf right there. I can say that.
Yeah.
Okay, well, thank you so much, Adam, for your time, and thank you for your book that you gave us.
Oh,
and
thank you.
Where can people find you if they want to read your blog or?
Great question. Yeah. Thank you. There are excerpts from the book on my blog. Yeah, you're right. So my website is Adam Steiner, STEINER.UK. And you go on my blog page, and I have loads of excerpts from the book there. So if you enjoy the excerpts, perhaps you enjoy the book. I'm on Twitter at Burnt Out Ward, which is BURNDT out Ward. And otherwise, just Google me. I'm out there.
He's easy to find online, and he's a good follow, and he will interact with you on the socials. So it's a fun
I will
time.
say hello. Yeah. I like saying hello to people, and they're like, Jesus, and they don't respond back. They're like, oh my God, that's too much. It's too strong. He came on too much. I was like, I just said hello, man. Jesus.
And I'm just like, hey, be on my podcast, please, I guess.
Which I'm happy and appreciative to do, because it's really nice, like, to talk to people who are fans and they read the book. Obviously, you enjoyed the book; it's great as well. Yes. But yeah, I really appreciate it.
Yeah, well, thanks so much for being here. It's been awesome.
Yeah,
very insightful. I'm sure we could go 10 hours more, but we have to be realistic here. So. Ooh, that was a great interview, huh?
Sorry.
What?
I was not expecting that to be the way you would come back. I'm sorry.
How would I come back? What were you expecting?
I don't know.
God.
Well, that and I wasn't expecting you to do it right then. Like usually you like prep me and you're like, okay, we're going, because you were fucking with the computer, and then you just sat down and said that like with no warning.
I was trying to catch you off guard.
Well, you got it.
So thanks for listening to that. I really hope you liked it as much as we did. Thank you, Adam, again.
Thank you so much. And this was supposed to be our downward spiral wrap up, which it kind of was. I mean, talking to Steiner.
It's part of the wrapping up process.
Yeah, but we were going to have a little bit more to share with you guys. But
that would have been like a 3-hour podcast. We don't need more of those.
A little too long, and also technical difficulty. Yeah. Which pushed our recording back to the point where we couldn't record because it's Christmas now. So as you listen to this, or as we do this, we're literally wrapping presents right now, folks. I'm stressed out. Okay, it's the holidays. It's Christmas Eve. We're stressed, man.
Consider this kind of your Christmas present, I guess, because we're putting it out right before Christmas.
We just felt bad about not having it out there for you or having anything. So
I'll try to put out something for the bonus content as well. It may not be the normal type of bonus, but I'm going to try to do something because everyone is so nice and generous with us that I'm going to try to put out content,
Yeah.
Should we say anything about the fundraiser or?
Yeah, I was thinking that we could definitely talk about that. So trying to brainstorm ideas to get money to invest in a new computer since the old one died, and we thought a really cool thing to do would be to have a raffle of some cool 9 Inch Nails stuff. So we've been gathering up stuff. We've got a T-shirt that it's a bootleg reproduction.
We've got rare shirts. We do. We have rare
It's
shirts.
a bootleg reproduction from Killer Cereal Co.
But we have
a cool 9 Inch
we're gonna
Nails
have
shirt
a
that I
bunch of
ordered.
stuff.
Mm-hmm.
The raffle is going to have many prizes.
We're gonna have a vinyl record.
Yep, at least one.
At least one. We're gonna have.
We don't even know. We're going to have sticker sets.
Sticker sets. We're gonna have one of my personal T-shirts that I'm donating. Maybe a Year Zero themed T-shirt. I don't know.
Personally worn by Jessica, covered in Jessica stank.
No, I've washed it, but it might have Oscar hair on it, and so I apologize.
No. Oh, I bet some people will pay a premium for that.
Maybe.
We'll auction off a lock of Oscar's hair.
He's already generously offered a dreadlock. He gets little dreadlocks because he's got a lot of hair.
Yeah, he has a lot of that shit.
I have to cut out his mats because he doesn't let me groom him enough.
But anyway, people seem to like us doing this, and I would like to resume doing this in a normal fashion. So it would be nice to have a working computer again, and not this laptop that is
not meant to be a recording.
I don't know what's going on, but yeah, it's clicking and popping, and so it's going to be hard to make more than a 5-minute podcast. Anyway,
we've also, I'm probably allowed to say this, right? But Matthew Love from Creepy Crawly Co.
has generously donated some items for the raffle,
which just made me so excited and happy. Like, just so many kind and amazing people that we've met doing this podcast, and very generous. So
yeah, and so if you want to, as of now, we haven't even set up. We're going to set up the fundraiser somehow. I haven't decided. For information, go to our Instagram at NailedPod, or once it's set up, it'll be at nailedpod.com, which has links to all of our stuff, including the Instagram and other socials and the Patreon. Of course, as usual for all our bonus episodes, we have 12 or 13 up there now. The link is there on nailedpod.com. It's patreon.com/nailedpod. Starting at $5 a month, folks. And thank you for being patient with us.
Thank you so much.
And for being generous, everyone.
Definitely.
Everyone's real supportive when I told them my computer ate shit. And I was feeling weird about asking for a fundraiser, but people were supportive, and we figured, hey, we could give a bunch of cool stuff away. So we get something, you all get a little something.
No need to belabor this.
Jesus. You know what I mean. It's a raffle. You know how raffles work.
Yeah. So we'll definitely be getting that together, and we'll post more information about that on our socials soon. Thanks to our patrons on Patreon. Blake said he said he's going to have maybe a non-traditional bonus ep to put up because we feel bad about not having that ready.
Yeah.
And
it might be bloopers. You want to hear our bloopers? Subscribe to Patreon.
Yike.
Yeah, yikes is right.
Next time we have a full-length episode, it will be our final downward spiral wrap-up.
We're actually do the final epilogue
We're
wrap-up.
hoping to get to the Fragile in 2022, but I don't know at this point.
I would really like to. We've got to try to get on a schedule here. Anyway.
Yeah.
Have a great fucking holiday.
Merry Ninmas to all.
And to all, a fist fuck. Sorry.
Had a margarita with my veggie fajita.